two chemo options, ABVD or BEACOPDac. Both can cure Hodgkin's lymphoma, but one hits much harder. Here's why my doctor recommended the tougher route. Welcome to the channel, friends. In today's video, I'm going to be going through my first ever appointment with my hematologist. So for those that don't know, hematologists, they're the specialist when it comes to blood cancers, so cancers such as lymphoma. So at this point, all of the results from the investigations have come through, although we're still waiting on the PET scan results, but that's not going to change the management. But we've got the CT scan results, we've got the ultrasound results, and at present, I've got advanced stage Hodgkin's lymphoma. So I went into the appointment, which was a very long appointment, roughly about an hour long, and the doctor sat down and spoke to me. They spoke through all of my investigations so far, so my blood test results, my scan results, and everything else. He also got to know me a bit more, so he found out that I'm a doctor myself. He was asking where I work and things like that, so he was building rapport as well, and I got to know him a bit as well, so it increased my trust in the consultant that's going to be treating me. So then the conversation basically came down to the treatment options that are available, because at this point he's got all of the results, and he basically proposed two options to me. I'm going to put it on the screen over here. So the first thing that he recommended was something called ABVD, which is this over here, and the second thing that he recommended was BEACOPDac. So those are the two things that he recommended, and these are basically two separate chemo treatments, and usually for Hodgkin's lymphoma the ABVD is the first line treatment. So it's very normal that, before going to the doctor, trying to find out what are the treatment options and things like that. So sometimes people do their own research, and as a doctor I did want to do my own research as well. So I went in with the understanding that I'll probably be doing ABVD, and that's pretty much it. But this doctor, he said, no, I don't recommend ABVD for you. It's an option. However, he recommends something called BEACOPDac, which is the more intense treatment. Now, when he said this to me, obviously I wanted to know what's the main differences between the two, what's the differences in terms of side effects, the cure rate, and everything else in between. I wanted to know everything about it. And I'll give you a quick summary just over here. So ABVD is essentially 4 drugs. So you got your doxorubicin, bleomycin, vinblastine, and dacarbazine. So these are the 4 drugs that are involved in ABVD. Whereas in the BEACOPDac, it's much more escalated as a treatment. So you've got stronger drugs. And some of these drugs, they overlap with the ABVD. So you've got the bleomycin, you've got the etoposide, doxorubicin, cyclophosphamide, vincristine, prednisolone, and dacarbazine. So 4 drugs versus 7 drugs. So that's the first difference between the two. The second difference is that the BEACOPDac, it's much more side effects compared to the ABVD. So with any chemo that you do in life, there will always be side effects. Your nausea, your vomiting, hair loss, diarrhea, constipation, and everything in between. Some increased risk of sepsis, low white cell count, etc. So that risk is there with ABVD. That risk is also there with BEACOPDac. But he said that the risk with BEACOPDac is significantly higher than the ABVD. So that's the first thing that he said. And he said the reason he recommends the BEACOPDac for me is because, number 1, I'm young. Number 2, I have advanced disease, meaning that I have nodes on both sides of the diaphragm, and I'm very symptomatic as well. I'm getting the recurrent fevers all the time, and my blood test results, they weren't the best as well. The inflammation markers were quite high, even though I've got no infection. So something definitely wasn't right, and that's another reason that he recommended the BEACOPDac. When it comes to the cure rates, he said that in my situation with advanced disease, the cure rate with ABVD, we're talking about 75 to 80% chance of cure rate. Whereas with the BEACOPDac, we're talking a 90% cure rate. So you could see that significantly higher cure rate when it comes to the BEACOPDac. And then the other thing to consider, he said, was the relapse rate. So with these treatments, with any cancers, there's always a chance that it can come back. And the risk of relapse with ABVD is at roughly 20%, he said. And he said with the BEACOPDac, we're talking 10% relapse rate. So basically, we have a better cure rate with the BEACOPDac, and we have a lower relapse rate. So although, yes, it's going to give me so many more side effects, it's going to make me feel so much worse, I'm probably going to need to be admitted to a hospital with some sort of infection or something that happens, the benefits are there. So the cure rate is much higher and the relapse rate is much lower. So it took days to make this decision, but me and my wife, we spoke this through quite a lot, and in the end we did choose for the BEACOPDac. So I'm going to be starting it this week and let you know how it goes, essentially. But just to touch on some of these drugs, because I used to be a pharmacist and I'm also a doctor, these drugs, they just might sound completely odd to you. It's likely that you've never really heard of any of these medication, but with any of the chemo drugs, people generally know what the side effects are. So I mentioned it earlier in this video, you've got things like nausea, vomiting, constipation, diarrhea, increased risk of infection, and so much more. But some of these medicines, they have key specific side effects. So for example, doxorubicin, which is this first medication in ABVD, that can sometimes be cardiotoxic, meaning sometimes it can, at very high doses, it can be bad for your heart, and that could be a long-term effect when it comes to the actual chemo. When it comes to bleomycin, that can cause lung toxicity. So that can cause things like problems in the lung. And that's why they recommended a breathing test before I actually start the treatment. With vinblastine, it can cause damage to the nerves in your hands and feet. So something called peripheral neuropathy. So these are specific side effects for some of these medication. And the carbazine, it doesn't really have any specific drug related side effect as much as the other medication do. So I'm not going to go too much into that, but it's the same thing with the BEACOPDac because there's a lot of overlap. But then with cyclophosphamide, it can cause bladder toxicity. So this can make your bladder bleed on the inside whilst you're on it. In the long run, there is an increased risk of toxicity, but as long as there's a medication that they give to kind of counter that, and as long as you stay very hydrated, then generally speaking, it's not too much of a problem. So these are just things that we needed to take into account when choosing the treatment. But in the end, after speaking to our hematologist, after speaking to our family, and just doing some research online, one of the things that I fear the most is being treated for this cancer and it's successful, and then having to do it all again in the future, even especially if it's in the next couple of years or so. I would much rather get treated and then just move on in my life and just forget this aspect of my life. And that's why in the end, I went for the BEACOPDac. The way I see it is short-term pain for long-term gain. So if you like this video, then feel free to subscribe. I'm going to be going through chemotherapy from this week, so I'll let you know how everything goes. Hopefully all goes well. And if you have any questions, then comment below.